Hi, I'm Dave DeRees, CEO of MiRealSource MLS in Troy, Michigan. And I'm happy to have with us today Kelly Sweeney, CEO of Coldwell Banker Weir Manuel. Thanks for agreeing to be here, Kelly.
My pleasure, Dave.
We're here today because we're in 2013. We're celebrating the anniversary of two special events that happened in our industry 5 years ago. One was the task force that you chaired for the Michigan Association of Realtors in 2008. And the second one is the beginnings of the Great Lakes Repository, which also started in 2008. Now, Kelly, could you tell us just a little bit about the task force, what the reason that it was called together for?
Well, back in 2008, there was a lot of frustration among practitioners with regard to having to access multiple MLSs and multiple databases, both from a search standpoint and also from a data maintenance standpoint. So we decided MAR decided to call a task force together to look at the issue, survey its constituents, both in terms of practitioners and MLS and association executive officers, to see which way the wind was blowing.
Okay, so a survey was done of the realtors themselves?
We surveyed pretty much everybody in Michigan and also some MLS executives outside of the state in the local region.
Oh, okay. And now I know that the survey results we're going to get to a little bit later, but now that you know what the task force was, we also want to tell you about the Great Lakes Repository, which also started back in 2008. And it's currently grown from 0 in 2008 to 10 MLSs sharing data today, and sharing it in the same manner that was described by the task force as what they wanted. Now, we're going to break away right now and give you a map and a chart to show you how the Great Lakes Repository is structured. And then when we come back, we'll go into a little more detail with Kelly on both the task force, the GLR, and what we can expect in the future. This chart shows the structure of the Great Lakes Repository. The yellow item in the center is the repository database. When an MLS joins the GLR, their data is mapped into the common data structure of the repository database. The MLS also maps the data from the repository back into their own home MLS system. This mapping of the data in and out only has to be done one time, even though additional MLSs can keep joining. This efficient system allows the repository to grow without added expense to each MLS. This map shows the coverage area for the listing data from the current 10 MLSs in the Great Lakes Repository. Each dot on the map represents a listing. The color code key identifies the MLS for each listing. Okay, we're back from that quick break where you got to see some information on the Great Lakes Repository. And Kelly, I'd like to go now into a little of the detail about the task force that you chaired, and tell us what work did the task force do?
Well, a couple important things about the task force. First of all, we had about 20 members from all over the state of Michigan. Every region in Michigan, including the Upper Peninsula, was represented. We reviewed the surveys. Well, for a lot of our time was spent crafting the surveys. We hired an expert from Florida to help us with that. And then, importantly, after the results were in, we held an all MLS meeting with every MLS represented in the state of Michigan, at which time we shared the results and had a real good discussion about where we should go further.
So as a result of the survey and the meeting, then were some summaries made or conclusions made?
We came up with some interesting concepts. First of all, it became very clear, and by the way, let me mention that going into this, we had no preconceptions as to what results might happen, what solutions might happen. We went with a white clean sheet of paper. So it became very clear, first of all, that no one had an appetite for a statewide MLS. We thought that might be the result. There was some conversation about that in advance, but it became very clear people wanted to maintain a couple things. First, they wanted to maintain local autonomy. It was very important that to everybody in the state that their local MLS could continue to make their own rules, charge their own fees, set their own fees, and keep their existing front-end software, whatever front-end software they chose to operate with in the future. Importantly, the other thing they wanted, though, was, in addition to local autonomy, is they did want a single database. That was key. Because the big problem everybody's trying to solve is bits and pieces of information held within each MLS where people near overlapping areas would have to join multiple MLSs, meaning pay 2 fees, do multiple searches to get all the information, and maintain multiple databases. That's really the problem in terms of time and expense for agents, and liability, by the way.
So what came out of it was they wanted one database, but they didn't want one MLS.
Correct.
Okay, and the concept was that they wanted to share their listings and put those listings in other MLSs and have other MLSs put their data in the one that they're used to at home.
Right, and the problem was then most of the accepted methods of data sharing were antiquated methods, like password sharing, submitting data to outside services that would hold it where you had to go somewhere else to get it. And that didn't really solve the problem because you still didn't have one single point of access and you had to maintain multiple databases.
And realtors had to learn another system.
Right. So that's where, at that time, the Great Lakes Repository was in its infancy. Nobody really understood how it worked. But now we understand 5 years later, the beauty of it is that is really the solution that we needed then. And you can see that that solution started to take hold in Michigan.
So the Great Lakes Repository, the way it brings data into their own home MLS, the one that they're used to, follows the recommendations of the task force.
Well, it accomplishes the two main objectives, which is single point of entry and single point of maintenance. Because as you know how it works, the data goes out, everybody aggregates the data in an outside database, but then it comes back and repopulates your own home MLS. So no extra searches, no extra charges, no extra maintenance. It's seamless, and that's really the solution that everybody wanted.
And the way this comes about is all of the data is put into one place, and that is only got to be done. That work only has to be done once, which means as other MLSs join, there's no additional work for that MLS. It's an efficient way to do it.
Very efficient, very cost-effective.
Which keeps the cost down.
And of course, the key to that is all the hard work that's already been done in terms of the mapping and all that, getting everybody on the same platform. None of that existed 5 years ago. It had to be built, and now it's built.
And now we started 5 years ago with 0, and through the hard work of many MLSs, all 10, we now have 10 MLSs sharing through that repository method.
Yeah, and that was, as you well know, a difficult thing to do. There were local politics involved, realtor politics involved, but I think, in my view, the Great Lakes Repository is such an efficient and workable solution. Such a good idea. It's so much common sense that it will eventually overcome any local or MLS politics because it's such a great idea.
And then once we get it, we're now at 10, we need to get up over 30 MLSs to join in. Then we'll get to the point where it's going to be MLS of choice, very similar to board of choice.
Well, ultimately, for the average practitioner on the street, that would be the goal, where any individual sales associate or agent in Michigan could make a decision to join one MLS, whatever MLS that they felt gave them the best service, had the best, most user-friendly front-end interface, and charge the most reasonable fees. And if we had ubiquitous data, then that decision would be out there. A realtor in Southeast Michigan could join Traverse City, or a realtor in Bay City could join an MLS down in Southeastern Michigan, whatever he felt served his needs the best, because the data would be ubiquitous.
And then that realtor would have more information than the general public gets from some of these aggregated public sites.
Well, it would really be the best solution. We would then be at a point where the consumers would not have a leg up on us. We could go to one source, one point of contact, and get it all. Great.
Well, I'm glad that you came over here and agreed to talk to me about this today. It's nice to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the task force that you chaired, as well as the 5th anniversary of the beginning of the Great Lakes Repository. And we would like to invite everyone to go to GreatLakesRepository.com. the website for the Great Lakes Repository, and we'll also post on that site the actual task force report that the task force put together 5 years ago. And it's nice to celebrate not only what happened 5 years ago, but hopefully we'll do this again in 5 years and discover that we now have a statewide database.
And thank you for getting the information out, because it is about getting the information to the average person on the street so they understand the issue.
Thank you.
My pleasure.